Have you ever wanted to read, but you just didn't have time? Even for those who love reading, it's hard to find time to read sometimes. This is where audiobooks come in, since you can listen to books while you're commuting somewhere or while you're doing housework. Audiobooks are very convenient, but can they be as useful as reading? A lot of people wonder whether reading a book or ebook is better than listening to an audiobook, so this video will compare reading versus audiobooks. As someone that read books and ebooks and used audiobooks, I hope this video can give you a good idea of which one is right for you. Let's look at the time aspect first. When I'm referring to the time aspect, I'm referring to how easy it is to make time for it and how fast you can consume the material. Audiobooks have the clear advantage in the time aspect. It's a lot easier to find time to listen to an audiobook than to find time to read. There are a lot of times you can listen to an audiobook during the day, while it can be hard to find time to read. If you have to drive somewhere, you can listen to an audiobook while driving, while you can't do the same for a book or ebook. The same concept applies for when you're doing housework. You can listen to an audiobook on the side, but you can't read while doing housework. Audiobooks also allow you to finish a book faster if you are a slow reader, since you can change the play speed to something faster, like 2 times speed. If you are a very fast reader, you'll most likely find reading a book or ebook to be faster, since you'll breeze through some lines that you don't think are that relevant. Time isn't everything, so let's look at retention next. According to a 2010 study, students who listen to a podcast lesson perform worse on a comprehension quiz than those that read the same lesson on paper. This might make you think that you remember more when you read instead of listen, but there are some factors you have to consider. During that study, most people had more experience learning from reading something than from listening to something. If you listen to audiobooks a lot more often, you should be able to retain as much information as when you read. While what I mentioned can make you believe audiobooks are just as effective, there's another factor you have to think about. Whether you're reading something or listening to something, you might find your mind wandering. You might lose focus for a few seconds or even a few minutes, depending on your mental clarity at that time. If you're reading, it's easy to find where you zoned out and start reading from back there. If you're listening to an audiobook, you might be too lazy to rewind and just keep going forward. If you're reading something more complicated where you might have to go back multiple times to refresh your memory, a book or ebook is better in my opinion. Ultimately, when it comes to retention, I think reading helps me remember the material more, but it might be different for you, so I recommend you to try both reading and audiobooks to see which is more effective for you. Let's look at enjoyment next. This section is mostly subjective, since everyone will have different preferences. I think that when it comes to fiction, it's a lot more enjoyable to listen to it on an audiobook instead of reading it myself. Most works of fiction have a good amount of dialogue, and it's a lot easier to understand the characters through audio than by reading the dialogue. You can derive a lot of information from the way someone's talking, like through their tone. It's a lot easier to understand things like sarcasm and resent through audio than through text. Having a voice to listen to also helps me better imagine how the characters would be as well. As for non-fiction, I don't prefer one over the other. Listening to someone explain something doesn't make a difference from reading it myself. You should figure out whether listening to audiobooks or reading books or ebooks is more enjoyable to you and go with that choice. Before I go over my closing thoughts, I want to quickly touch over physical books versus ebooks. I prefer ebooks over physical books because when you're reading on a Kindle, you can make adjustments like dark mode so it doesn't strain your eyes as much. My eyesight isn't the best, and ebooks on dark mode are much better for my eyes than physical books. If your eyes can't handle reading too much, you ideally should choose ebooks over physical books, or just choose listening to an audiobook instead. Let's go over my closing thoughts. The difference between reading a book or ebook and listening to an audiobook isn't that big. Both methods are just as effective if you're reading or listening for enjoyment, or to learn something. If you do have important material that you have to learn and remember, I personally would read that material instead of listening to it, since my retention ability is stronger when it comes to reading. It might be different for you, so you should choose the option you are more comfortable with when it comes to important material. If you care more about convenience and don't have that much time, audiobooks are most likely for you. If your retention abilities are better when you read, you might want to read instead. At the end of the day, try both and see which one you like more. I hope this video helped you figure out whether you would prefer reading or listening. Do you read or listen to audiobooks? Leave a comment below and check out the video on the end screen about why reading is important and the benefits of reading.